On today's show, Democrats in the state legislature unveil a new carbon cap and invest bill for the climate crisis. A couple more candidates join the already crowded field for Congressional District 2. The vote splitting problem and its connection to the Elizabeth Warren-Bernie Sanders dust-up. And an interim state legislative committee holds an informational hearing on ranked choice voting. Welcome to Oregon News and Views from Social Advance. I'm Charles Dunaway.
And I'm Alan Zundel. A week ago, Democrats released their revised version of last year's controversial carbon cap and invest bill. That's the same one that failed due to opposition from Republicans and a few Democrats in the state Senate. The bill, also referred to as cap and trade or the Clean Energy Jobs Bill, is meant to address the climate crisis. It would put a declining cap on carbon emissions in key economic sectors, establish auctions for tradable allowances, and use the proceeds for carbon reduction projects. Here are some excerpts from a hearing in the Senate Interim Committee on Environment and Natural Resources on Monday.
A number of people have been, looking over the events of last year, poring over the thousands of pages of testimony that we received last year, and looked at how can we properly address this issue in a way that really considers the needs of all of Oregon.
Now, collectively, we represent the broad cross-section of stakeholders in transportation who, depending on our role, we own, maintain, build, use, and pay for Oregon's infrastructure. And today we wish to register the following concerns with LC 19, which is a significant piece of legislation, as we all know, and which, if passed into law, could have major impacts to Oregon's transportation system, which I'll walk through very briefly, and could also cause downstream impacts to the economy as it ripples through with increased fuel prices.
Focusing on reducing carbon through efficiency rather than rate increases allows us as a business to not only reduce our carbon footprint, but also to avoid the crippling effects of major rate increases.
So securing a cap and invest framework in Oregon, an efficient multi-sector policy that puts in place an enforceable limit on climate pollution that is consistent with the scale of the challenge, will provide a very powerful template for what state-level climate leadership ought to look like, and would show a very clear and replicable path forward for other states who need to get serious fast about delivering real reductions on a very near-term timeline.
The Oregon AFL-CIO does not have a formal position on the entirety of that policy, but continues to be supportive of several key provisions included. And we also have suggestions on the policy to make the policy stronger for working Oregonians.
I'm waiting to hear from someone to say this is perfect, just as it is.
The Senate committee is one of several interim committees which held hearings this week to prepare for the upcoming legislative session. The session convenes on February 3rd.
No Republican legislators have expressed support for the revised bill, and their leaders say they retain the option of walking out of Senate sessions. That would stop the bill by denying a quorum. Last year, Republican senators did walk out, and the bill was set aside when 3 Democratic senators also refused to support it. In another possible repeat of last year, Timber Unity is gearing up to stage a protest of the bill. The group formed last year to oppose the cap and invest bill and drove trucks around the Capitol blowing their horns. They are planning a similar protest for Thursday, February 6th.
Meanwhile, an environmental group won a court victory to put multiple carbon reduction initiatives on the ballot. Renew Oregon, which supports the carbon cap and invest bill, had filed 3 ballot initiatives in case the legislature fails to pass a bill. In December, Secretary of State Bev Clarno disqualified 2 of those initiatives. But this week, a circuit court judge reversed Clarno's decision, allowing the initiative petitions to move forward. And in an interesting twist, Republicans have called for putting the cap and invest plan on the ballot, saying, let the voters decide. But Democratic Senator Michael Dembro says the program needs to get started sooner, and if a majority of the legislature passes it, the other party should accept that.
The primary fields in some high-profile Oregon election races are getting crowded, even as some candidates have dropped out. Recently, in U.S. Congressional District 2, Jimmy Crumpacker of Tumalo entered the Republican primary, and Alex Spencer of Klamath Falls entered the Democratic primary. CD2 is Oregon's largest congressional district, covering most of the eastern side of the state. It's largely rural and leans Republican. Incumbent Greg Walden is not running for re-election this year, creating an opening for aspiring congressional representatives. By our count, that now makes 4 candidates in the Republican primary for CD2 and 3 in the Democratic primary. Another high-profile race, Oregon Secretary of State, is also crowded, with 4 Democrats running. No Republican has yet filed for that one.
This brings us to the problem of vote splitting, which is also a factor in the recent dust-up between presidential candidates Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. When you can only vote for one candidate and there are more than 2 candidates on the ballot, there will be vote splitting. Picture an election in which there are 3 candidates, each of whom attract about a third of the vote. Candidate A gets 33% of the vote, Candidate B gets 33% of the vote, and Candidate C gets the remaining 34% of the vote. The votes were split between them. That means Candidate C wins without a majority of the votes. So what, you say? Candidate C got more votes than either of the other 2 candidates. But imagine that candidates A and B both appeal to voters who like the color orange, who make up 66% of the vote. The orange vote was split between the 2 candidates they liked. Candidate C appeals to voters who like the color green, still making up only 34% of the vote. The orange voters would prefer either candidate A or candidate B to candidate C, but they still lost to the minority of green preferring voters. The majority lost the election. This is the reason tensions heightened last week between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, both of whom appealed to many of the same progressive voters. A recent poll from Iowa showed them both behind Joe Biden, regarded as a more moderate candidate. If the progressive voters all got behind either Warren or Sanders, their combined vote of 33% would be 9 points ahead of Biden's 24%. The temptation is for the 2 progressive candidates to try to get voters at each other's expense, despite any desire to support each other as ideological colleagues. The more candidates there are in a race, the worse the vote-splitting problem can be.
There are solutions to the problems associated with vote splitting. Rather than limiting voters to voting for just one candidate, voters could have the option of indicating their opinions of any or all the candidates. One way to do this is with ranked choice voting, in which voters can rank the candidates in their order of preference. Then there is a special counting process to find a candidate supported by a majority, which could include multiple rounds of instant runoffs. On Tuesday, the Senate Interim Committee on Campaign Finance held an informational hearing on ranked choice voting. Here are State Senator Mark Hass, who is running for Oregon Secretary of State, and State Representative Dan Rayfield.
I've looked into ranked choice voting for some time now and done the research and found that I think that this is something that presents a candidate that is more representative of what that community is looking for.
And the last thing that I really believe, and this is something that I really want to study in Benton County and other areas and other voting systems, whether STAR gets done in Eugene or wherever, is the impact on actual turnout.
You heard Rayfield mention STAR voting in his testimony. In STAR voting, voters get scores to the candidates rather than ranking them. There's also a special counting process for STAR voting involving an instant runoff. During the public comments section of the hearing, no one testified in favor of ranked choice voting, but there were 4 advocates of STAR voting. Here's one of them, followed by remarks from Senator Jeff Golden, the chair of the committee.
And subsequently, many of the other people I know in the electoral community in Oregon moved over to advocating the other method. This new method is called STAR voting, which was mentioned once or twice earlier. So mostly what I want to say today is that if the committee goes further in considering ranked choice voting or any type of alternative voting method, I hope you would invite people who are advocates of STAR voting also to talk about it and talk about why they think it is even better.
If there is, as I expect, more discussion going forward, there'll be a lot of opportunity to talk about the the STAR approach as well.
Monday is Martin Luther King Jr. Day, so be sure to find a good way to commemorate it. We'll be back next week with more news on Oregon politics, so follow us on one of our social media accounts, or go to our website at socialadvance.org, where you'll find our new videos page with links to videos and to Charles' podcast.
On my Wider View podcast this week, my guest will actually be Catherine Shaktam, an expert on the Middle East and Shia Islam. Catherine was supposed to be on last week, but due to scheduling difficulties, we couldn't connect. But she did reach out to me this week, and she is available, and the podcast is now up on widerviewradio.podbean.com and on Apple and Google Play. Thank you for watching, and remember this when you vote. If you could rank or you could score, you wouldn't go away so sore.